I live anywhere I live in the United States. I am almost certain that your area has been affected by the increase in homeless people that has hit the country in the last, from the big cities to the small towns. It seems impossible not to see them standing on the corners, asking for help, gathered in assistance centers, or just sitting on the sidewalks. Some are victims of circumstances, the rising cost of living, the astronomical prices of rents and mortgages, or an unexpected streak of bad luck. Others fall victims of their own vices, spending the money that could give them a roof or a job opportunity on alcohol or drugs to which they are addicted. There are also those who are a result of the deinstitutionalization that occurred in the 1960s-80s during the presidency of Rian, whatever the case. They are everywhere. I work as an investigative journalist in a medium-sized coastal city of about 10,000 inhabitants. My passion for discovering the truth and my perseverance have allowed me to rise at the local paper. I started out as a freelancer, but 4 years later I was already part of the staff. Editors have always valued the stories I publish, from investigations into drug traffickers smuggling fentanyl from Mexico, a report that not only got me the front page, but also resulted in multiple to the exposure of a local preschool that engaged in unethical practices with parents' money. So a month or two ago, I was called into Kevin's office, our editor-in-chief. I sat down in the comfortable leather chair in front of him. "So what's the latest scoop you want me to cover, sir?" I asked, as I sipped a cup of coffee that he offered. Kevin stood up, closed the door, and pulled down the blinds before sitting back down. "How much have you been paying attention to police scanners lately?" he asked, as he laced his fingers behind his head. I took a deep breath before answering truthfully, since that kid attacked his neighbor with a pair of gardening shears not long. So I thought. Kevin said, leaning forward. His serious tone woke up my curiosity. So I leaned in too. "Why, what is going on?" Kevin didn't have his usual smile, which indicated that it was something serious. The local police have noticed that some of the homeless people in the city limits have been, so to speak, doing. "You mean they disappear? They go to other places?" I asked, tilting my head. He didn't answer, shaking his head. "I mean, they disappear completely, as if the earth had swallowed them. That got all my attention." "You know how many?" I asked. Inside my mind was divided. On one hand, I felt compassion for the missing people. On the other, the journalist in me saw a promising case. Kevin denied again. "I don't have an exact number, but since January it must be between 60 and 70. I felt my jaw drop. 60 or 70 people was an alarming number for a city of our size. Even more so, considering the amount of new homeless people arriving regularly, often brought in by bus from larger cities, who wanted to get rid of them before I could say anything else. It rang the phone on his desk. While he answered the call, I got distracted, looking out the window, watching the coast below the cliffs, where our office was located. What could make so many people disappear in such a short time? I thought about human trafficking. The homeless were ideal targets for something like that. Also crossed my mind. Another equally disturbing and dangerous possibility, a serial killer who was specifically targeting the homeless. Nate Kevin's voice brought me out of my internal speculations, bringing me back to the present. The somber expression on his face, even more serious than before, gave me to understand that the call had something to do with what we had been discussing. They just found the body of one of the missing homeless on the beach. Unfortunately, a couple of kids discovered it while playing. "Great," I moaned. imagining the years of therapy that awaited them and their parents. Kevin nodded. I want you to talk to the police since you have good relations with them. Find out what you can with or no pictures. He stood up, and I imitated him, then pointed to the door. From now on, you are officially assigned to this case. 10 minutes later, I was maneuvering through the afternoon traffic in my old Chevy Corsica, dodging SUVs and larger crossovers. As I drove down the road that runs along the beach, my mind wandered, thinking about the case in journalism. They teach you to focus on 6 essential elements: who, what, when, where, how, and why for now. I only had the where, and I needed to work on the other questions when I saw the flashing police lights. I slowed down and pulled into one of the few free spots, avoiding the patrol cars, the ambulances, and the black Cadillac of the coroner at the end of the in-line. I approached the officer stationed behind the yellow tape. It was a young man of about 20 years old that I knew well. "Hi, Evan. How are you?" I said. As I approached, he narrowed his eyes in the gray light of the cloudy day and smiled at me. "They already put you on this case?" Nate asked, raising a hand, which I shook firmly. "Yes, you already know Kevin," I replied. "He always assigns me the difficult cases that the others don't want." Evan let out a laugh, which I responded before he got serious. "This is one of the ugly ones, buddy," I said, with an expression that made him look slightly pale. I was surprised. Evan used to be a tough guy, able to withstand almost anything that bad. I asked him. Evan lifted the tape to let me through. "See for yourself." He replied, "Ray is down there now." I gave him one last look before heading down the path to the beach as soon as I got to the sand. The stench hit me like a punch, forcing me to cover my nose. God, what a stench! I was thankful I didn't have lunch and continued walking to the circle of people gathered around the body. A surly-looking detective looked up as he saw me approach and quickly intercepted me, raising a hand. "Wait there." Nate said it was Ray Broadbent, a man around 40 years old and almost 180 tall. His expression told me that he had probably already missed lunch at least once. "Is that serious, Ray?" I asked him quietly. He nodded. "I can't say much because it's an ongoing investigation, but between you and me, Nate, this is one of the worst dead bodies I've seen, either here or in my days in Portland." I pointed to the camera hanging around my neck, but he shook his head. "No pictures this time." "Captain's orders." I pulled out my notebook and opened it. "At least give me some basic details." Ray seemed to debate with himself for a moment before nodding. "Do you have any idea who the victim is?" I asked him officially. He didn't say it's an ongoing investigation. I looked up at his choice of words, and I put the notebook down. He sighed, but unofficially, yes, it is the old man. "Fred." I almost dropped the notebook. Fred had lost his home when they closed the local Veterans Association. He was always nice and polite. Whenever I could, I made sure to give him a 20 or 50 bill. Ray noticed my expression and muttered, "Whoever did this is a monster." He continued mumbling, "What kind of sick individual cuts a man like that, as if something had torn a huge piece out of him?" He stopped suddenly, realizing what he had just said. "Don't publish that," he ordered in a more stern tone than usual. I held up my hands reassuringly, and he seemed to relax a little before nodding. Although I usually put up with a lot of things, the detective's words made me realize I didn't want to see that corpse. Not if he looked like that. I decided to stay professional. The coroner has an approximate time of death. I asked, holding up my notebook. Ray nodded. Yes, Dr. Baxter estimates that he died around midnight yesterday. I quickly jotted down. What about clues or suspects? I insisted. He shook my head. I can't reveal that, my friend. He replied firmly. I nodded. I closed the notebook and put it in my coat pocket. I'm sorry, but I can't share anything else for now. Not even with you, he added before turning around and walking towards the circle of people. I watched him walk away as the sea breeze for a brief moment mitigated the stench of the corpse. I knew this place would stink for days, if not weeks. I decided to walk along the deserted beach. Maybe I would find something interesting. As I turned around, I took one last look at the group of police and doctors. I had chosen a bad moment to do so. Some of them moved away just enough for me to see the body for about 4 seconds. 4 seconds too long. I saw the bald, bearded face of old Fred. His eyes were wide and glassy, and his mouth remained frozen in an eternal scream. The expression of horror on his face was chilling, to say the least. But the worst was the huge, open wound on his chest. Jesus King, he hadn't exaggerated. It looked like something had taken a huge bite out of his abdomen. Then the group closed in again, blocking my vision before I could see more. Even so, I knew the image would be etched in my mind, haunting me in my dreams that night. Turning around, I walked away quickly, inhaling the fresh sea air and trying not to lose control. That seemed to help a little. My heart stopped racing, and my breathing returned to a normal rhythm. I looked around. If it weren't for the officers and Fred's corpse behind me, this place might seem peaceful. The seagulls sang over my head. Some came down to the beach and strutted on the sand. In the distance, the deep sound of the lighthouse siren broke the silence, warning that a bank of fog was approaching. Well, that means I don't have much time left out here. I said to myself, when the fog comes to our town, you can barely orient yourself on the beach. If you're not careful, you could end up walking straight into the sea. As I pondered, a flash in the sand caught my eye. I looked down and arched an eyebrow as I recognized what was a necklace with 2 silver chains ending in a shark tooth. Tiger, immediately, who it had belonged to, was old Fred. The strangest thing was that it looked broken. The chain was broken at the clasp, as if someone had ripped it off. I crouched down, brought the camera to my eyes, and took a picture looking up. I noticed something else about 6 meters from me. Embedded in the rocky side of the cliff was what looked like a drain pipe. It was easy to miss because they had painted it a similar color to the rocks, probably to camouflage and maintain the natural look of the beach. Curious, I approached and noticed another object that shone in the cloudy light this time. Something golden. When I reached the edge of the pipe, I crouched down to see better. It was a gold wedding ring, and not just any one. It was Fred's. That ring was his most valuable possession, a memory of his deceased wife, and he had always refused to pawn it, no matter how much money they offered him. But then, why was he not wearing it anymore? I turned my gaze towards the beach from where I was. I could still see the crowd surrounding the body. Then I looked at the pipe again. I took out the camera. I took a photo of the ring and pointed it towards the inside of the pipe. It seemed to extend quite a bit, but beyond about 12 meters. Everything was lost in the darkness. It is big enough to enter. Crouching, I thought. For a moment I looked towards where Ray was still talking to other officers. The sensible thing would have been to return immediately and report on what I had found. But something stopped me. You are an investigative journalist, Nathan Harker. And what investigate? I tried to ignore that impulse, but I couldn't. Finally, I gave in. I wasn't going to go in unarmed. Anyway, I lifted the bottom of the coat and shirt, revealing my pistol Beretta. Since the fentanyl dealers had threatened me, I had gotten a permit to carry, and carried the gun everywhere I went. I didn't want to be another journalist who ended up dead. I took a deep breath, dropped my coat, and pulled a small flashlight out of my pocket, turning it on. I illuminated the pipe. I could now see further in the tunnel, continued around a corner, about 20 meters ahead. I'm glad I'm claustrophobic, you murmured to yourself as I crouched down to enter. Progress was slow, to say the least. The surface of the pipe was slippery, covered in trapped algae. When the tide went out, I moved forward carefully, so as not to fall, while the camera hanging around my neck lightly hit my chest. Suddenly I stopped in my tracks. A chill ran down my spine, the kind of instinctive feeling you get when someone is watching you, even if you can't see them. I raised my head and looked towards the corner now, about 4 meters away. There was nothing. I turned to look back at the opening that led to the beach. I didn't see anything there either. Maybe I'm not as good with closed spaces as I thought. I shook my head to clear it and kept going. The worst thing I could find in this pipe was an angry crab, I said to myself, but the feeling persisted like a pang in the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. I finally reached the corner and poked my head out to see what was beyond the tunnel. Went down, even more. Probably about 45 additional met with a margin of 1 or 2. I could also make out several smaller branching pipes that connected to the main one. Although I couldn't see where they led, I took a deep breath and continued going down the new section. Beams of light filtered in from above. As I looked up, I noticed what looked like storm grates, about 3 or 4 meters above my head. The function of this pipe was not only to prevent the tides from eroding the cliff, but also to redirect rainwater into the sea. The smell of the ocean here was overwhelming, as if it had soaked seaweed stuck to my face. I looked down in annoyance as I noticed my sneakers were soaked, making soft squeaking sounds with each step. However, my thoughts faded when something caught my attention, a stain on the wall of the pipe. Right at eye level, I illuminated it with the flashlight. It was red, a deep red blood. I approached cautiously to inspect it. I did not touch it, but upon looking closer, I confirmed it was definitely blood. I already had a hunch about who the victim could be, considering the trail of belongings from the entrance. Well, Nate, you found your story, you murmured, barely audible. Time to get out of here and call the police. I was about to turn around when something else stopped me. Something was sticking out of the pipe next door. Even from my position, I distinguished a lock of green-dyed hair hanging from the edge. A shiver ran through my neck. RPO, Fred's killer. He's still here. Tension filled me, my muscles, they contracted. But along with that instinctive fear, something else, anger, arose. I don't usually get angry easily, but I thought about old Fred, a man who never hurt anyone. Unleashed a fury that I couldn't contain. I turned off the flashlight immediately, and with slow movements I took out my gun. If the killer was still here, I would turn him over to the authorities, but not before making sure that he understood what he had done. In retrospect, I recognized that it was an impulsive and dangerous decision. I wasn't thinking clearly. A killer could easily finish me off, even if I was armed. But at that moment, reasoning didn't matter. Prepared or not damn sick. Here I go, I thought. Angrily, I slid the figure, whoever it was still there. Apparently lying face up inside the pipe, the soft patter of the rain began to resonate on the metal structure as it advanced. Drops of water slid down the pale skin I could see from my position. I stopped about 2 meters away. I still couldn't see the face clearly, or any more details of the figure, but I wasn't going to take any risks. I pointed the gun at the portion of the visible forehead, ready for anything. Right now, you have a 9mm pointed at your head, and the man holding it has a damn sensitive trigger. My voice echoed firmly in the tunnel, but the figure remained motionless. Great, I got one of those. I gritted my teeth and spoke again. You killed someone I cared about, ignoring me. It's not the best idea, so get up. Be quiet. The figure didn't move an inch. My patience was running out. I felt the heat rising to my face. My blood was boiling. That person was there, indifferent, as if he didn't care about the life he had extinguished. In a fit, I decided to act, well, as you want. He growled from the pipe. What I saw when I looked out erased any trace of anger, replacing it. Horror, the glassy eyes already clouded by death, stared fixedly at the ceiling of the pipe. The open mouth, frozen in a scream, was a replica of Fred's face. She was a woman, another homeless person like him. Her face was already stained with dirt, and the needle marks on her arms told her story. I couldn't see the lower part of her body hidden behind the curve, but what I could make out turned my stomach. A large chunk of her chest had been torn away, leaving a grotesque wound that extended from her shoulder down. What the hell, I whispered, struggling to swallow the bile that rose in my throat. And then she moved. I froze, unable to look away from the body. It was impossible. She was dead. She had been in that state for hours, if not days. However, I saw her move. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. I must be seeing things, I thought. But then I heard a deep breath, almost like a low growl, a sound that shouldn't come from a corpse. Suddenly the body was dragged backwards, disappearing into the branch from the pipe. With a sudden and unnatural movement, I stepped back, clumsily slipping on a piece of seaweed and falling on my elbows. The path slipped from my hands, and my gaze strayed to the ground as I searched for it. My fingers finally found the barrel, but a new sound diverted my attention to the branch. When I looked up, I almost lost control of my sphincters. A huge hand, or rather a claw, was clinging to the edge of the pipe. It was black with a rough texture reminiscent of the skin of a predator. The fingers, 4 in total, ended in long, sharp claws of a bone color. They curved hard, piercing the plastic of the pipe as if it were butter. The soft growl transformed into something more threatening, and I saw how the muscles under the black skin were clamped out. Whatever it was about to enter the main pipe. It was then that I knew I did not want to know what that claw belonged to, and if I did not move quickly soon, I would be as dead as Fred and the woman. Ignoring the panic that was taking over me, I turned around and ran as fast as I could down the pipe. My breathing echoed loudly in the narrow space as I struggled to keep my balance on the slippery surface. If I fall for even a second, I'm dead, I thought with terrifying clarity. I was 3/4 of the way to the corner when I heard a sound that was a mix between a growl and the cruelest laugh I had ever heard, it coming from behind. I didn't want to look, but something stronger than my fear forced me to do so. I turned my head and looked over the H. Today I wish and will wish, until the last day of my life, that I hadn't done it. The rays of light were quickly extinguished inside the pipe, leaving everything plunged into darkness. I could barely make out anything, and although that prevented me from seeing in detail what was chasing me, the little that was hinted at was enough to make my skin tingle. I tried to move forward as fast as I could, half-crouched in the narrow space, but that had no problems with the limitations of the place. Its dark silhouette moved with an inhuman speed, propelling itself towards me. I could hear the crunch of its claws as they dug into the walls of the tube, a sound that echoed and accelerated my breathing in the blink of an eye. The distance between us was reduced to half without realizing it. I began to murmur between gasps. Oh, a cold certainty hit me. This was the end. My mind drew a terrifying image of my lifeless body lying in that pipe. That would be my grave, with a huge bite where my chest used to be. The thought shook me, and in a flash of adrenaline, I remembered what I had in my hand when that was less than 6 met, far enough to distinguish grotesque details like algae and kelp. RDH wounded to its body. I raised the fence and opened fire. I did not aim at anything in particular. I just pulled the trigger again and again, screaming in pure terror. As I backed away to the corner of the tube, the shots echoed in the narrow space, and the almost deafening echo mixed with a roar that was a mixture of pain and rage. My attacker expected no resistance from his prey. The magazine quickly emptied, and as I continued to back away, my hands trembling, searched for a replacement in my belt. I ejected the empty cartridge and replaced it. My attention focused on what was in front of me. The claw peeked out from around the corner with its curved fingers and long claws piercing the plastic of the tube. Its presence was imposing, but what came next was much worse. It laughed, not a grunt or a gasp, a full-body laugh. It had a wet and sick gurgle, as if it were laughing through a mouthful of seawater. There was nothing funny about it. In fact, that laugh just intensified my horror. This thing was enjoying this. I knew that at any moment it would launch itself on me. So I unloaded the entire magazine directly into his hand, and at the corner of the tube, the shots rang out in a desperate attempt to keep him at bay. And then I fell. I didn't even realize that I had reached the end of the tube until the air escaped from my lungs as I hit the sand, and the rocks, for an eternal second, panic consumed me. I was sure that it would come after me, grabbing my ankle to drag me back to that nightmare. But when I looked up, I found something unexpected. I was not alone in front of me. There was a group of policemen with their weapons pointed at me. A dozen cannons were watching me with unfriendly intentions. I immediately let go of the Verita, raising my hands with my palms up. Please don't shoot, for the love of God. Don't shoot for a moment. The weapons remained firm, their stony faces immutable. Then a familiar figure emerged among the agents. Ray shouted, his expression a mixture of anger and exasperation. "What the hell are you?" We could hear the shots from the whole beach. I didn't answer him. I just pointed towards the pipe. "There it is! There it is!" I almost screamed. I saw the agents hesitate. They slowly lowered their weapons and looked at each other with faces loaded with confusion. The same expression rested on Ray's face. "What's in there?" he asked seriously. My voice trembled as I tried to explain. "Oh, there's another body in the pipe, that of a woman, and there was something else in there, something that bothered me. I had to shoot it to stop it." The agents exchanged tense glances before turning their attention back to the dark entrance of the pipe. They slowly raised their weapons, pointing towards the interior. They knew I wouldn't make something like that up, much less shoot my weapon without a compelling reason. Ray crouched down in front of me. He helped me to stand up and picked up my gun from the ground without saying anything. He put it in the waistband of his pants and turned to the others. "Call on the radio right now and bring the shotguns and flashlights as soon as possible. Escort the witness to the police station. We are moving. Do not let your guard down and keep your weapons ready," he ordered firmly. Without waiting for an answer, he began to lead me along the beach. Although the idea of going to the police station did not please me, I knew that arguing would be useless after what I had just experienced. Those small tables and metal chairs, accompanied by the cold one-way glass, did not seem so bad in comparison. "Who or what exactly did you see in there?" he asked, as he opened the passenger door of his unmarked car. I looked at him, but the words did not come out. The horror continued to take hold of me. I just shook my head, unable to utter a response. Ray watched me for a moment, before looking back where the officers stood attentively next to the entrance of the pipeline. Then he closed the door and went to the driver's side. The rain that until then had been a drizzle began to fall, hardly turning into a downpour. Ray started the engine and reversed the car with. As we walked down the deserted street, I realized with a terrifying clarity that I had just gotten involved in something much bigger than I could understand, something that I liked or not. I was already a part of. When we passed a manhole on the sidewalk, I couldn't help but look at it. The darkness coming out of it reminded me of an open mouth, like a monster's waiting to devour whoever came too close. A shiver ran through my body. The image of that thing charging towards me, laughing with that inhuman and grotesque laugh, kept playing over and over again in my mind like an endless echo of a nightmare.